So they recently had a financing for development conference in Addis, and this is about the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, and how to actually finance those moving forward. After almost an entire year of working on the Sustainable Development Goal Initiative as the CRT, what types of thoughts and reflections do you think that you could offer on that?
Eric, my thought is a sort of a sad one, that the old vinyl record is stuck. We're stuck at the same point at 15 years ago when the Millennium Development Goals, the first set of goals for countries, in that case poor and developing countries, was decided upon, promulgated, and became a work program, action program for many countries. Poorer countries to do better in developing, richer countries to provide assistance. And then, and the Co-Roundtable was concerned back then, all the thinking was basically about government finance. And here we are 15 years later, and all the thinking is still that governments are going to do this. And this is, I don't know quite how to put it, myopic. It's impractical because of the basic point. Governments don't create money. Governments don't create wealth. Governments print money, but they don't create the reality that supports wealth. And that's only the private sector. And if we go back to Adam Smith, not everybody is enamored of Adam Smith, but he made this point. In fact, his book was called, as I remember, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes, the causes and origins of the wealth of nations. In other words, he was examining a system. How do you create wealth so that people will have more money, more property? And what he focused on was division of labor. His famous example was the making of straight pins. That instead of having one person spending all day making 200 straight pins, you could have a team of 10 people dividing up 18 different steps in the manufacturing process and making, 4,000 pins, which brought the price down dramatically, which helped poor people. And by making 4,000 pins over 200, you created more goods, more wealth. And that division of labor is in the private sector. Now, obviously, capitalism is far from perfect, as we've seen over 200 years. But if you don't have the private sector and business and capitalism, where's the wealth going to come from? That's my disappointment with the discussions in Addis. And the Sustainable Development Goals for the whole world can only be achieved if the private sector is making more money. Goal number one is the elimination of poverty. How are we going to eliminate poverty without creating more jobs? You can't tax enough to put all the poor people in the world on a government payroll or a welfare program. Somebody's got to create jobs so that people can work and earn money. But that means somebody else has got to have money to buy the goods or services that those people are producing. How are we going to do that for a couple of billion people? The next issue, which they did not talk about it in Addis, was the current levels of debt. For various reasons, I think two main. One, the collapse of credit markets in 2008. The world was kept from going into a huge recession or a big depression by basically the expansion of debt. Governments printed more money, they made more liquidity available. There's just a lot of debt out there. So the debt went way up and the actual economic growth hasn't gone up that much. As with a person, as with a business, so with governments. If at some point you run out of your capacity to borrow more, governments are now running out of their capacity. We've seen the problems with Greece. We saw it earlier with Spain and Italy. The United States has huge amounts of debt. China has a debt problem. Japan has a debt problem. With all this debt out there, where is the flexibility, where's the capacity of governments to borrow money today, invest it in development of other countries, and somehow get paid back in the future so they can pay down the debt? If governments are prevented from investing because there's already too much debt, that, for a second reason, pushes you back to the private sector. So how do you get the private sector engaged, and what are they going to do with all these sustainable development goals? That conversation is not being had, and to me, that's the most important conversation to have.